in a stone chamber buried deep underground, where eerie green candles burn, not because of the wind, but because something darker is whispering. A figure in a black cloak stands in the middle of a circle of white bones. There is no prayer, no weeping, only the soft crackle of ancient dust falling from skeletons older than human memory. He murmurs syllables that belong to no living language, and as the final word leaves his lips, a dry skull slowly lifts its head, its empty sockets staring as if seeing through time itself. In that moment, the one thing humanity has always bowed to, death, seems to slow down, hesitate, as if someone has dared to say no to it. Necromancer, the one who dares step into the territory every religion, every civilization warns us to avoid. Who is he, really? Is he just a sick sorcerer obsessed with power, or a twisted mirror of our deepest obsession with death and separation? And why, after so many centuries, does the image of this corpse caller still haunt the human imagination so stubbornly? The world where the necromancer exists is never truly peaceful. It might be a vast fantasy continent, with kingdoms clashing on Dragonback, stone cathedrals cold as iron, and graveyards stretching all the way to the horizon. By day, people speak of gods, laws, glory. By night, they whisper about restless spirits, graves that open when the blood-red moon rises, footsteps that echo in castle halls without belonging to any living body. In such worlds, the border between life and death is not a solid wall, but a thin veil. And the necromancer is the one who dares to reach out and tear that veil. If we look back at humanity's history of imagination, the necromancer does not appear out of nowhere. From the earliest civilizations, there are always those believed to talk to the dead. In ancient lands, people thought they could seek advice from their ancestors before great decisions, could beg the dead to protect the living. In some places, these rites were performed by shamans, spirit mediums, seers, in the smell of incense, drum beats, chanting. But as organized religions and rigid moral codes took shape, calling upon the dead, questioning the grave, became taboo, labeled as heresy, witchcraft, a betrayal of the divine. From there, the figure who spoke to the dead slowly slid from mediator to criminal, from sacred shaman to forbidden necromancer. In modern imagination, especially Western fantasy, the necromancer has a very clear silhouette. He often appears gaunt and angular, his face hollowed out by too many years spent with corpses and curses, his eyes glowing faintly like swamp fire in a marsh. On his body, a long robe trailing the ground, embroidered with skull motifs, iron chains, and ancient sigils etched in dried, darkened blood. In his hand, a staff of charred black wood or human bone, crowned with a cloudy green gem whose light never truly illuminates anything. It only makes the darkness thicker. Around him, bones, ash, circles of magic drawn in dust, blood, salt, and other things better left unnamed. And yet, the necromancer is not a single fixed image. There are versions where he is an old wizard, hiding in a maze of catacombs beneath the earth, avoiding sunlight because he has grown too used to damp stone and the smell of decay. Other versions show a young woman, eerily beautiful, her eyes always listening to voices no one else can hear. Sometimes the necromancer is a scholar living in a library, dealing not with bones, but with parchment, scrolls of forbidden lore listing the names of the dead. However his outer form shifts, one thing remains. He stands on the razor's edge between life and death, and he knows how to make that edge tremble. Imagine a city that has just survived a plague. Church bells have fallen silent because there are no hands left to ring them. Streets stand empty, windows boarded shut, and the cemetery has no more room for the dead. People ask, why did this happen? who first brought the ashes into the city, who committed the sin that forced an entire community to pay the price. When priests have run out of prayers and healers have run out of remedies, another figure comes knocking at the council's door. He does not promise to heal the living. He promises to wake the dead and demand the truth. That night, in the crypt beneath the cathedral, among freshly sealed coffins, the necromancer begins his ritual. When the lid of the first coffin creaks open, when the cracked lips of the first victims start to move, that city has handed ultimate power to someone who refuses to let death close the book. Another tale speaks of a kingdom on the brink of annihilation. The enemy is more numerous, richer, better armed, their banners covering the hills like a tide. The king and his generals sit over maps, but every strategy leads to defeat. Then someone mentions the man exiled to the northern border, once the royal mage, cast out for forbidden studies on immortality. They summon him home. The necromancer returns, not with an entourage, but with wagons filled with bones. At dawn, the enemy looks down into the valley and sees an army the living mind cannot comprehend. Rank upon rank of soldiers who do not breathe, do not tremble, do not fear death, because they already died. In that moment, the kingdom chooses. It is willing to turn death into a weapon, as long as it is not the one that loses. But behind the wars and the gains of power, perhaps the most haunting stories about necromancers are not about how many corpses they command, but why they stepped into the darkness in the first place. The most familiar version is the one who lost someone he loved, a wife taken too soon by sickness, a child who did not survive the winter, a brother who fell on the battlefield. The funeral ends, the earth is packed over, and the living are comforted with the old promise that time will heal. Yet some people refuse that answer. For them, bowing to death feels like a cosmic injustice they cannot endure. So they begin to search. They turn every page of Forbidden's lore, memorize every incantation that should never be spoken, hoping that just once, the door between worlds will open again. In this light, the necromancer is not just cruel to the dead. He is someone so desperate that he cannot accept death as the last word. Necromancer, the one who refuses to let death win. If we peel that phrase apart, layers of meaning appear. On the simplest level, the necromancer is a brute interference in natural order. The living should live, the dead should rest. He refuses to accept the most basic rules of the universe. He puts himself in the place of the gods, deciding who gets to rest, who must rise again to serve his purposes. On a deeper level, he is the image of a mind that will not accept limits, that cannot tolerate the answer, impossible, where doctors, priests, philosophers all stop at the boundary of death. The necromancer does not. He keeps digging. He keeps asking. He keeps pushing the border, even if the price is his own soul. From a psychological angle, the necromancer is the embodiment of a person who cannot accept loss. In real life, when we lose someone dear, we pass through shock, denial, anger, bargaining, and, hopefully, acceptance. The necromancer is someone stuck in denial and bargaining, but with the power to turn bargaining with death into an actual ritual. He doesn't just sit in a room replaying memories, looking at old photographs. He goes to the grave, opens the coffin, calls the soul out of the dark. He refuses to let go and turns mourning into magic. That makes him both terrifying and tragic. Terrifying because he shatters moral boundaries. Tragic because his origin is often love and a wound that refuses to heal. On the level of society, the necromancer can also stand for a community's obsession with its past. Some societies cannot allow their darkest chapters to lie quietly. They dig, they reopen, they demand confessions, answers, punishment. The necromancer, standing in a graveyard and calling the dead to answer who lied, who betrayed, who started this war, is the extreme image of that need. Humans crave truth so much that they are willing to disturb even the dead. In fantasy, this becomes the scene where a necromancer interrogates a spirit for passwords, curses, buried secrets. In modern life, it reflects the way we comb through files, data, history, never letting anything fully disappear. Religiously and symbolically, the necromancer often stands opposed to belief systems that see death as a doorway to release. In many traditions, letting the dead rest is sacred. Disturbing graves, troubling spirits is a heavy sin, an insult to deities, or a disruption of cosmic order. When the necromancer turns graveyards into battlefields and souls into a resource, he touches the absolute taboo. That's why, in so many stories, he is the enemy of churches, temples, altars, of heaven and earth alike. Yet in some cultures where ancestor worship, calling spirits, and asking the dead for guidance are normal, the line between ancestor priest and necromancer becomes blurry. When the rite still holds deep respect, it is faith. When it turns the dead into tools, it becomes necromancy. In modern fantasy, games, novels, films, the necromancer often stands alongside other archetypes: paladins, priests, druids, healers. The paladin fights for light. The priest prays for souls to find peace. The druid merges with the raw force of nature, while the necromancer commands what is already dead. This contrast sharpens his symbolic weight. In some stories, he is pure villain, leading skeletons, zombies, wraiths against the living world. But in deeper tales, he drifts into gray. He might use forbidden's magic to fight a greater evil, or to protect a land abandoned by gods and kings. Such characters raise an uncomfortable question. If forced to choose between letting evil win or using cursed methods, what would we really choose? Compared to other death-tied beings like vampires or likes, the necromancer has a unique place. The vampire is dead, but continues to live by feeding on others, symbolizing hunger, addiction, desire, parasitic survival. The lich is the mage who turned himself into an immortal, sealing his soul in a phylactery and trading away humanity for endless time. The necromancer is different. He is still alive. His power lies in manipulating others who have died. He does not necessarily seek immortality for himself, at least not at first. What he wants is to break the absolutism of death for others, whether to exploit them or keep them. That makes him the most direct embodiment of not letting death win. If we pull the necromancer closer to our world today, strange echoes appear. Now, people don't need dark rituals and crypts to hear the voices of the dead. All they need is a phone, one tap, and they can replay the last voicemail from someone gone. Scroll up, and old messages, photos, videos glow back to life. There are projects using artificial intelligence to recreate the voices, faces, even speaking style of the dead, letting the living talk to them again through a screen. It's not necromancy in the old sense, but emotionally, it brushes the same nerve. How far are we willing to go? Not to say goodbye. When technology lets a person's shadow linger long after their body is gone, every time we press play, we repeat what the necromancer whispers in the crypt. Stand up. Just one more time. There is another kind of symbolic necromancy, the way we constantly resurrect dead ideas, myths, icons. In pop culture, old characters get remakes, reboots, reimagined in new films and games. Stories that should have ended are reopened. Characters are pulled from the graveyard of collective memory onto the stage again. On the surface, it's business, nostalgia. But deeper down, it is a kind of communal ritual. Humanity refusing to let the stories that once moved us truly die. Here, the necromancer does not stand in a tomb but in a writer's room, a studio behind a keyboard. He doesn't raise corpses. He calls back characters, images, concepts. In books, films, and games, the necromancer continues to evolve. Some tales paint him as pure demon, but more and more works give him inner depth. The necromancer might be the only one willing to listen to forgotten souls, to carry the blame so that balance between worlds is kept. He might understand that death is not only an ending, but also memory, lesson, warning. When he calls spirits, it is not always to control them. Sometimes it is to let them speak, to keep history from being twisted. In such stories, the necromancer is closer to a historian, or an investigator of the invisible, than a one-note villain. Of course, we cannot ignore the darkest edge of this figure. Turning the dead into tools is one of the most disturbing things imaginable. In many cultures, respect for the dead is a measure of moral health. Cemeteries are not just storage for flesh, but sanctuaries of memory, spaces where the living admit that they too will lie there one day. When the necromancer walks into that space with his instruments and erases the line between beloved and resource, he tramples something sacred. That is why, in so many works, the most horrifying moment is not the wide shot of skeletal armies, but the intimate scene of a loved one's coffin creaking open, and someone once cherished being dragged back as a weapon. If we step back and ask why this image returns over and over, the answer may lie in how the necromancer touches a very deep nerve. Few things are as absolute as death. Logic, faith, philosophy, science, all have to admit there is a point beyond which their rules no longer apply. But human nature instinctively resists absolutes. From extending lifespan, curing disease, studying cryonics, dreaming of uploading consciousness to machines, all of these are cleaner versions of the same urge. We do not want to let death win. The necromancer carries that urge to its dirtiest, most extreme form, forcing us to face a question. If the rules really could be broken, are we sure we would say no? The necromancer also reveals something about power and knowledge. The caller of spirits holds more than magic. He holds information no one else can get. The secrets of the dead, their last words, their hidden truths. In today's world, those who own the archives of the past, old files, emails, messages, browsing histories, wield a similar power. They can resurrect what others thought buried, use it for protection or destruction. In that sense, the necromancer is a magnified image of the gatekeepers of collective memory, those who decide which past is retold and which is buried deeper. If we see the necromancer as a figure in each person's inner journey, he might be that part of us that always wants to go back, never forward. The part that keeps reopening old conversations, rereading the last email, wondering, if I had said something different, done something different, would they still be here? Would this relationship still exist? That part cannot accept that some doors never reopen, that some people exist only in memory now. The necromancer is what happens when that part suddenly has power. Instead of just imagining, it can literally open the door and drag the dead back. Then the question changes. If you really could do that, are you sure you'd want to? In every version, cursed villain or tragic anti-hero, the necromancer keeps one core trait. He refuses to bow to death. For him, time is not a straight road from birth to grave, but a circle that can be pierced, bent, tied into knots. He pays with his soul, his humanity, and the hatred of both the living and the dead. Yet it is this extremity that makes him such a powerful symbol in fantasy. Each time the necromancer steps into a graveyard, a battlefield, a crypt, people are not just looking at a sorcerer. They are looking at their own biggest question, hovering in the air. If you could reverse the irreversible, what would you do? When night falls, when the city sleeps, and only a faint light burns over cold headstones. Sometimes the necromancer is imagined not as a lord of darkness, but as a gatekeeper. He walks between the rows of graves, listening to whispers from both sides, the living begging to pull the dead back. the dead begging the living to let go. Standing there, he is no longer simply hero or villain, but the embodiment of a tension that never ends in the human heart. A tension between holding on and releasing, between clinging and accepting, between saying just one more time and understanding that no one more time ever comes free. In the end, what keeps the necromancer alive in our imagination is not just armies of bone or demonic rituals. It's that he poses a question no one has finished answering. How much suffering, how much sacrifice, how much darkness would be acceptable if it meant death did not win completely? Some look at the necromancer and feel disgust. Others feel pity. Others see him as a warning of what happens when we go too far. But whatever we feel, he forces us to pause, to think about the names we have already lost. If one night, in a silent graveyard, someone whispered to you, with a single ritual, you could hear that voice again, see that face again, for just one moment, would you walk away? Or would you stay and listen to the murmur of the dark? And if that instant of hesitation is exactly where the necromancer is born, then perhaps he has never been as distant from us as we like to believe.